Good afternoon. My name is Stuart Gauthier, County Agent with the LSU Ag Center, and welcome to Get It Growing. Today we'd like to talk to you a little bit about what are some plants that you can get growing in your home flower beds and gardens. And we have two of our master gardeners here with us today, Genee Foley, who's in charge of our plant swap, and Becky Taylor, who is our plant propagation chairperson. And they're going to be giving you some ideas on how you can divide and cut up plants and even start plants from seeds that you might want to try here in South Louisiana that we found as master gardeners will survive our tough weather. So with that, let's turn it over to Becky, and she's going to get started and teach us a little bit about separating rhizomes.
Good afternoon, gardeners. Gingers are a wonderful plant for our southern gardens because they love our heat, our humidity, and our rainfall. They like our gardens so well, in fact, that sometimes they crowd out other plants. When this happens, it's very easy to take up your gingers and divide them, set in new plants, and also share with your friends. When your ginger is beginning to show its growing point, you are ready to divide. Try to take your shovel and dig 8 to 10 inches away from the clump of ginger. Then you will come up with a mass that looks like this, a gnarled mass of rhizomes. Take a strong jet of water from your hose and wash away all the mud and all the dirt. You won't hurt the rhizome at all. It's important that you try to preserve the growing points on the rhizomes because this is where your new plant will come from. Once you have divided your rhizomes and get down to just one, inspect it, looking for healthy roots. Anything that is diseased or decayed should be cut off with your snips. Clean it of all the old cane, of lesions that could invite disease, and get down to your working rhizome. Inspect your rhizome looking for the growing points, which are called eyes. Here you see these little protuberances will become new plants. At the narrowest part of the rhizome, take a very, very sharp knife and slice until you have one growing point or more. In this particular case, we have 3 or 4 different growing points that will each become a beautiful new leafy stalk of the butterfly ginger. The butterfly ginger is a wonderful ginger for beginning gardeners because it requires very, very little care. So I urge you, if you have a friend who's growing butterfly ginger, to ask them to divide and help them. Be sure you cut away all brown spots on the rhizome, which would invite disease. Now, if you are planting it into a pot, use a very, very loose growing medium, such as ground pine bark, and put it immediately into a pot. Top dress with a time-release fertilizer, such as Osmocote or Peters. However, if you are growing it in the beds, putting it directly back into the soil, particularly if the weather is cool and moist as our spring has been, it's a good idea to dunk it for about 10 minutes in a 10% bleach solution. This will help to ward off any funguses or diseases. When you're ready to plant your rhizomes, work up about 4 inches of organic matter into your bed. Gingers like a loose, humusy soil. The butterfly gingers, the hedychiums, can take quite a bit of sun. Many of the other gingers require shade or dappled light. So it will be up to you to do some research on which ginger for which location. Set your rhizomes to where they are about only 1 inch below the soil. Water in well and use a good all-purpose fertilizer and wait for the fun to begin. Your gingers will send up stalks, and by late summer, the butterfly ginger will be full of beautiful butterfly-looking blooms that have the most wonderful fragrance to reward you for your work in the garden. Other gingers, particularly for the shade, would be the hidden ginger or the Siam tulip, which is a very new ginger on the market. They all are wonderful gingers. Gingers are something you need to explore, and call the Lafayette Ag Center, Louisiana Ag Center, if you have any questions concerning your ginger cultivation.
Thank you, Becky. We get an awful large number of calls about gingers every year, and Gingers are becoming one of the most popular plants that you'll find in Acadiana gardens. We'd like to take a few of your phone calls. One of the important missions of the LSU Ag Center is to help people in the Lafayette and Acadiana community with problems that they may be having in their gardens. And you can call in at 232-4434, extension 207, and we'll be happy to take your calls at this time. If you have any questions about maybe problems that you're having with your trees or your shrubs or your vegetable garden, we have a panel of expert master gardeners here who are here to help you. I have a few questions about gingers. I thought I'd throw out a few things to you, Becky. We get a lot of calls on gingers every year, and some of the popular things that we get calls about, I thought that I would just kind of touch base with you and ask you. One, we get a lot of questions. What would kill a ginger in a flower bed if you're having trouble growing gingers?
What would kill a ginger would probably be a fungus if it entered through the lesions that weren't cut off of the rhizome. Actually, too much water can kill a ginger. Most of your rhizotomaceous and tuberous plants don't particularly need a lot of water. So if your bedding media is thick or heavy, that could possibly kill a ginger too.
How about cold weather?
Most of the gingers here are very cold hardy. They will die down, but almost all of them will come back.
Why would somebody have trouble with their gingers flowering?
There are several gingers that bloom on old canes, and if we have a cold winter to where the canes die back, then they won't bloom. Shell ginger in particular, the variegated shell ginger, is a very good example of this. It has to have its 18-month cane to bloom. So unless it's in a very protected area where the cane is not killed back, it won't bloom. And also some gardeners mistakenly cut back their gingers and cut off the cane that would be blooming.
Now when we look at this ginger and we were looking at the rhizomes there, we get a lot of calls. Is this the same kind of ginger that we eat? Can I eat this ginger?
Well, all ginger rhizomes are edible, but they're not all the same ginger that the culinary ginger. That ginger is Zingiber officinalis, and it is one that's grown far more for its root than for its bloom. But yes, you could eat it, but you wouldn't get the same flavors as you have with your culinary ginger.
And I know they were doing some work at LSU, was doing some work with some of the other universities that were even looking at some of the medicinal properties found in some of the gingers that we don't normally eat. And the gingers that they do grow for human consumption, a lot of it's grown in Jamaica and a lot of tropical countries where it would probably be hard for you to succeed with it here. But none of the gingers, to my understanding, are poisonous.
No, they're not poisonous. And actually, you could buy a ginger root from the grocery store and treat it in the same manner as this, and you could get it to grow.
I know we've promoted gingers a lot at our plant sales the last few years. And why do you think gingers all of a sudden, or maybe it's not all of a sudden, but it's becoming so popular right now?
Well, actually, in a way, it is more all of a sudden. People are understanding that gingers are so easy to grow. They really do require very little care once they're in the landscape. And as I said, they really like our heat, our humidity, and our rainfall. So people are pulling out their hostas and putting in gingers and planting more gingers in their shade gardens and finding out just the vast variety of gingers there are and the different blooms that are so long-living on the stalk.
One of the things that we've worked real hard on are our demonstration beds at the R. Nelson Center.
Yes.
And we do have an area that's kind of dedicated at R. Nelson to planting some of the popular gingers that will do well here in South Louisiana and that we offer from time to time at our plant sales at Festival de Fleurs and our fall plant sale. So if you're interested in gingers, we'd like to invite you to come out and look at our demonstration bed and look at some of the different colorful gingers that you might want to try in your home gardens. While we're waiting for some phone calls, I thought I'd touch on some of the things that we're getting a lot of questions about. Oh, I see that we have a phone call here on line 1. Welcome to Get It Growing.
Yes, Stuart. This is Glenda calling. I have an apple tree that last year we only had a few apples on it. This year it is really covered with apples, but I'm having a problem that the apples are falling off. We have a neighbor that's nearby who also has a different variety. So I don't feel as though it's the pollination. What would you think is the the reason why the apples are falling off on me now.
Do you see any disease on the apples? Do the apples look normal that are falling off?
Yes, they do.
They look normal. How old are the trees?
Well, I only have one tree. The neighbors, I'm really unsure of how old theirs is, but I would venture to say that we've probably had it now for 3, possibly 4 years, but it'll probably be 3.
Because fruit will board off of trees for different reasons. Sometimes, do you know what variety of apple you have?
It seems like it's Anna or something like it's one actually that we had found out that was, good to plant in this area here.
The Anna is a good apple. Like you mentioned earlier, it does require pollination, and a lot of people will plant a variety called Einsheimer as a pollinator. Sometimes even if the little fruit form initially, if they aren't pollinated right, sometimes they'll form, but then because the seed development isn't proper, they'll drop off later when the plant is a little bit stressed. You could maybe bring some of the fruit in if you'd like that are falling, and we could send some off to some of our specialists with the LSU Ag Center and have them look. But I would be maybe inclined to think that you may still be having some pollination problems or some stress problems, and that's why the fruit are aborting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Glenda. Okay, now we'd like to go on to our next segment, and we are going to talk a little bit about dividing perennials in general, and Becky's going to help us with that.
Today, we're going to talk about the perennial Ryan's Pink Chrysanthemum. Ryan's Pink is a Korean mum and very, very attractive and a favorite of the master gardeners because it doesn't make that little meatball of flowers when it blooms. The Ryan's mum sprawls similar to a ground cover. It's wonderful when it's planted at the base of roses where it can grab up into roses. It makes a pink daisy-like bloom. It grows vigorously in our area, so it needs to be divided about every 2 to 3 years, as most perennials do. A good judge of whether or not your perennials need to be divided is if they are not blooming as well as they did in the past. When you divide your perennials, take your spade and cut a large chunk out of your perennials, trying to leave as much of the soil as possible. Then, with a very sharp knife, divide that chunk further into small plants. These are the plants that you will be setting back into that perennial area once you have amended your soil with some good organic matter or compost. And you can put these rooted divisions right back into the soil, giving them some water, and in short order you will have a full ground cover of Ryan's Pink again. Now, when you divide, it seems a shame to have to throw away all those wonderful little plants that are left by the wayside. So you can take the rooted divisions that fall away, and again, using our very, very loose premium potting mix, pot them up, and they will root and make more plants to set out in a different area or to share with your friends. Other perennials that are divided the same way would be the rudbeckia, daisies, or any of the perennials that are clump forming. As the flowers get smaller, the leaves get smaller, you'll know, it will tell you that it's time to be divided. Rather than taking out small sections of the perennials, you will have much better luck if you take up your whole bed and, as I said, amend it and set back in your smaller divisions. Don't be worried that you won't have a great show of flowers. Your plants will reward you with a better show, larger blooms, more blooms in the same season. So take a look at your perennials and divide one a year perhaps, and you will always have an ongoing supply of plants to share, plants to spread further in your garden, and an ever-increasing supply of plants to cut. Take a look at your perennials, feed them well, water them well, get them established, and they will give you many, many hours of enjoyment throughout the summer.
Thank you, Becky. I think we have a call coming in now. Welcome to Get It Growing.
Hello.
Hello.
I had a question about tomato plants.
Okay.
I planted some in March, and they just don't look good. It kind of looks like they're dying.
Okay. Are all the plants that, how many tomatoes did you plant?
5.
5, and are all of them look equally sick, or do some of them look sick and wilting and drooping, or?
All of them look sick and wilting and drooping.
Okay. Have you sprayed them with anything?
No.
You don't spray any herbicides around your garden, or?
That's probably what I need to do.
Well, no, you wouldn't necessarily need to do that. Have you fertilized them any since you planted them?
Just a little, just with Miracle Grow.
And how often do you do Miracle Grow?
Oh, maybe once every other week.
Every other week. A lot of times, especially on tomatoes, they're heavy nitrogen feeders, and you're going to have to get on a real good fertilizer program. And if you want to use Miracle Grow, it's a good fertilizer, but you're going to have to use probably about a gallon on each plant every week to really feed that plant enough as it starts to grow and get larger in size and start to produce fruit. So it may just be that your plant is just running out of food and you need to kind of get on a real strong fertilizer program, and I think that should help get those plants on their way.
Miracle Grow makes one for tomatoes.
They make a special tomato formulation that you might consider trying.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
We get a lot of calls at our office on tomatoes and other vegetable questions, a lot of problems people see in their yards this time of year. I know this past week and this past month we've had a tremendous number of calls on caterpillars. And I thought that we could maybe talk a little bit about caterpillars and why we're having so many caterpillar calls this year. Caterpillars kind of go in cycles, and I've worked for the Ag Center now for about 10 years, and I would say this year by far we've had the most caterpillar calls that I've ever seen come into our office. And we have different species of caterpillars that will attack our trees in the spring. Some of them can be quite damaging to the trees and can also sometimes become a human health hazard. We have one caterpillar that's called the buck moth caterpillar. And the buck moth caterpillar, as you see here, has spines on it. And if that caterpillar lands on your skin, sometimes it might be your kids pick it up or you're walking under the tree and it falls on you. And those little spines will embed in your skin. And they have a toxin on those spines that will cause an itching and burning sensation in your skin. If you would happen to get stung by one of these caterpillars, the best thing to do is to put a little piece of Scotch tape over it to pull those spines out. And then because the toxin is actually an amino acid, if you put a basic product, something that has a basic pH to it, like toothpaste or baking soda or meat tenderizer or tobacco juice or ammonia, all those things are alkaline, and they will kind of neutralize that acidic toxin, and that will help kind of take the sting out of those buck moth caterpillars. What to do about the caterpillars? You can spray. There are some insecticides that, especially if you mix a little bit of liquid soap, like a little bit of maybe Dawn dishwashing detergent or lemon soap, put about a teaspoon per gallon, and that helps to wet those little spines and those little hairs. It helps the insecticide to get a little better penetration and to kill that caterpillar. Mix that soap along with an insecticide, and the pyrethroid and permethrin type chemicals are very good at killing caterpillars. There's one called cyflothrin that's very good. There's also some biological insecticides like dipel that work real well at killing caterpillars. But generally, the caterpillars are not going to kill your tree. In a few weeks, they'll be gone from your trees. And if you can just bear with them and just stay out of the way of the buck moth caterpillars, your trees will generally rebound. And those caterpillars just have one life cycle per year. Okay, now we'd like to move on to our next segment. We have Genee Foley, our master gardener, we're going to kind of finish up on our propagation section by talking a little bit about what seeds you might consider planting right now.
Well, one of the big problems in talking about seeds is teaching you to resist temptation. When you're standing before that display of 50 or so seed packets, all of which have beautiful, gorgeous flowers that you want in your garden, you're tempted to pick up twice as many seeds as you and two or three of your friends can grow in your garden. There are several annuals that are popular, and this is a good time to be planting them. Sunflowers is one. If you've been in a discount store lately or one of the home building stores, you've seen seed displays with probably 20 or 30 different varieties of sunflowers. If you're interested in growing sunflowers, again, I urge you pick up one pack. You will have enough for you and 2 or 3 of your friends. Morning glories are neat and unusual plants that you can't buy in a garden center. One trick to know about a morning glory, if you read your seed packet, it's going to ask you to soak those seeds overnight to weaken your seed coat so that the seed can germinate quickly. All you do is put in a little bit of water, pick out those seeds that have plumped up, and plant them according to the packet directions, probably about 1/4 inch deep. Moonflower is one of my favorite plant seeds. Makes a gorgeous 4-inch flower that blooms in the afternoon. The seeds look like little teeth. They have to be scarified, which only is a fancy term for meaning nicking the outer seed coat of the plant. It's of the seed. It's hard, and you can take a nail clipper and just give it a gentle clip. You don't want to disturb the embryo of the seed. Scarlet running bee. Is a nice large seed, makes a beautiful orange or scarlet colored bloom. And it, like moonflower, one nice thing in dealing with them is if you're a curious person, after you've planted those seeds, you can dig around in your seed medium and pull it out and check and see how it's doing and actually replant it, and you're not going to hurt anything. You can't do that with a smaller seed because you're going to disturb your dirt and actually lose your seed. Black-eyed Susan vine or Thunbergia comes in packages that are either mixed colors, a white and a medium gold and a light yellow, or you can buy it in a single color packet. The same thing with your zinnias. They can be bought in mixed color packets or single colors. The important thing to remember when dealing with seeds, they're really just condensed plants. You've got to provide that seedling with water and fertilizer and light just like you would any other plant. One other important fact to consider is when you're dealing with seedlings, especially some of these smaller ones, you really have to learn how to be hard-hearted. In addition to restraining yourself to half the number that you really want to buy and half the number that you really want to plant, when you're dealing with small seedlings, you're going to get in your seed pack 2 or 3 little seedlings coming up, and you have got to be hard-hearted. It's probably one of the hardest things we do in gardening is pulling those darling little seedlings out. And you can replant if you need that many plants, or just consign them to your compost pile and they'll come back to benefit your garden. It's also very, very important when you're dealing with seeds is to immediately label these plants as soon as you get them seeded. If you go inside and you're going to come back 5 minutes later, what you're going to see here is a pack of dirt. And if you've planted 2 or 3 kinds of seeds, you don't have any idea now which is in this pack unless you've labeled those plants well.
Thank you, Genee. We get an awful lot of calls on people wanting to start their own plants themselves, and often they'll plant their little seedlings and they'll start to die. What are some things that might kill a young seedling?
Lack of water. In this part of the country, unfortunately, we usually have too much water or too little water. A seedling just has, an immense need for water. It's also important if you're growing seedlings in containers like this, before you put them out in the ground, they need to be hardened off. You just gradually expose them to a little bit more sunlight and a little bit less water. You want to toughen the plant up just a little bit before it actually goes into the ground. Now, and many of these seedlings are going to wilt when you put them out. Try, if we've got an overcast day, it's a great day to plant seedlings out. but even so, they are going to wilt. You've stressed them, but keep taking care of them, watering them, dilute fertilizer, and they should grow into beautiful plants for you.
I know sometimes too in the spring especially people will try to start seedlings inside of their house,
Right.
and it makes a very weak spindly seedling because it's not getting enough sunlight. They'll often also have a lot of trouble sometimes with damping off, which is a
Right.
fungus that will come in if you're keeping them too wet, or if especially in the spring it's a little cool in your greenhouse, you'll have a lot of trouble with damping off, and those plants have to be treated with a fungicide often to correct that problem. Well, that's about all the time that we have for today on Get It Growing with the Lafayette Master Gardeners. We were glad that you could join us, and we'll be here again next week taking your phone calls and your questions about your problems in your home garden.
The views expressed in the previous program are solely those of the program participants and its producer. They do not necessarily reflect the views of Cox Communications, Lafayette City Parish Government, the AOC Board of Directors, or its staff.
Acadiana Youth
makes calls to seniors.
I call when he might be a little down.
He calls, but it's mostly when he's a little down.
Hey, Hector, it's Patrick.
Patrick Kearney knows what matters.
We talk about everything, even football.
He asks me for advice.
Hey, Hector, it's Patrick. Hey, Hector, it's Patrick. Hey, Hector, it's Patrick.
You don't have to be Patrick Kearney to make a difference in your community.
You're going to have to speak up a little bit. I love hearing the smile on his voice.
Don't thank me. It's the least I can do.
Hi, my name is Madonna Broussard of Laura's Restaurant. Thank you for watching Acadiana Open Channel.
The views expressed in the following program are solely those of the program participants and its producer. They do not necessarily reflect the views of Cox Communications, Lafayette City Parish Government, the AOC Board of Directors, or its staff.
Hello, my name is Stuart Gauthier, County Agent with the LSU Ag Center, and welcome to Get It Growing with the Lafayette Master Gardeners. Today, we've decided to devote an entire show to butterfly gardening. And one of our main reasons for doing this is because we are fortunate to have one of our members, Ms. Becky Taylor. She's one of our past Lafayette Master Gardener Club presidents with us today, and she is also our club butterfly gardening expert. She has lectured around the Acadiana area with numerous groups on the topic of butterflies. And last year we had her at the Daylily Festival in Abbeville to come talk about butterfly gardening. And today we thought that it would be a good show that we could devote and cover the next half hour talking about butterflies in the home garden. Welcome, Becky.
Thanks, Stuart. This is a good time to talk about butterflies. The nighttime temperatures are warming up, the daytime temperatures are getting nice and hot, and butterflies are starting to fly. Now, you might not know that you are a butterfly gardener, so I'd like to give you a little information about what to look for to find the butterflies in your own garden. First of all, almost every home garden here in South Louisiana has a citrus tree, whether you're growing oranges or lemons or satsuma. You have citrus growing and you have butterflies growing on your citrus. There's a very common butterfly here in South Louisiana called the giant swallowtail. One of the largest butterflies in North America. The giant swallowtail has a wingspan of about 6 inches. It's a beautiful brownish black butterfly with yellow chevron stripes across its upper body. It flies very, very lazily through the garden, and it drinks for a very long time. It's a very, very voracious feeder. The giant swallowtail is sometimes called the orange dog or the orange puppy, and is not a big fan of the citrus industry. But here in our butterfly gardens, we love it because we can watch our citrus grow and we can watch our butterflies grow at the same time. Now, the larva of the giant swallowtail is a very, very shiny larva. Some say it resembles bird droppings. It's a brownish and white larva. It goes through several different stages before it reaches full maturity. One odd thing about the giant swallowtail and other swallowtails is the scent gland that it will protrude when it feels threatened. This is called the osmeterium, that funny red horn-like look to the larva. And this is where it gets the name the orange dog, when it sends out this scent gland. This is to ward off any predators that may be trying to eat it. The giant swallowtail lays her eggs on the tender leaves of your citrus plants, whether it is lemon, grapefruit, lime, or oranges. Now, and so one of the benefits of having citrus is, of course, it's a fabulous landscape tree. The blooms are wonderful, the fragrance is wonderful, it's evergreen, and of course you're rewarded with a bounty of fruit at the end of the season. The giant swallowtail does not affect the production of the fruit. It will only eat the tenderest of the leaves. If there is any problem with the giant swallowtail hosting on your citrus, it might be that your tree gets a little bit misshapen as the leaves are eaten off and the new growth comes out. But it's a small enough price to pay to have generation after generation of giant swallowtails feeding in your garden. So check your citrus trees. And if you may have been calling Stuart about those worms on your orange tree, you might not have known that you were a butterfly gardener all along. So Stuart, do you get calls about the giant swallowtail?
Yes, in fact, we were talking about earlier before we started the show last week, I did have some caterpillars brought into the office, and I left the orange dog caterpillar on my desk, and within a couple of days it had already started to form a chrysalis, and probably if I pay a little attention to it, I'll have a butterfly before long. It's one of the ones that we have a lot of parents will pick off of their trees, and then when they find out that it is the giant swallowtail butterfly larva, they'll try to rear it out in their homes. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that. How would you go about rearing out a little caterpillar?
It's very, very easy to rear out. Once it goes into its chrysalis, it requires no care at all except to be put into a ventilated container, an aquarium with a reptile screen or a bug box, or even a jar with a piece of pantyhose on top. And within 10 days to 2 weeks, you will have a brand new giant swallowtail to come out and to release. And it's a lot of fun to give these new butterflies to your children and have them release them.
Okay, we do want to remind you at this time that this is a live call-in show. And so if you'd like to call in, our number is 232-4434, extension 207. You might have a question about butterfly gardening, or it might be any question about gardening in general that you may be having problems with in your home landscape this time of year. Our next segment, we wanted to move on while we're waiting for some calls to come in. I wanted to talk a little bit about nectar plants. A lot of people say, I want to be a butterfly gardener. What should I plant?
Well, fortunately, butterflies are attracted to so many of the plants that grow so easily here in our area. Many of the most common and easiest to grow nectar plants are the purple coneflower, the zinnias, which grow very, very easily from seeds, black-eyed Susans, any member of the Rudbeckia family, whether it is the small goldstrum or the giant coneflower or any other black-eyed Susan, is a very, very good nectar plant, as well as pentas. And your butterfly weed is a wonderful nectar plant that's visited by almost every butterfly in the garden, as well as being a host to the monarch, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then lantana. The same with citrus. Almost everybody has lantana in one form or the other in their gardens. So if you have lantana, you have a very, very good source of nectar for the butterflies. But if you can only have one nectar plant in your garden, I really suggest that you put in a butterfly bush, a member of the Buddleia family. The butterfly bush is, in my opinion, what could be called the crown jewel of nectar plants, because every butterfly that visits your garden will visit your butterfly bush. Even some butterflies that maybe don't like nectar as much as they like other things will visit the butterfly bush. There's a number of different butterfly bushes, from very, very tall Red Delight series to the shorter Nanho series. So there's room for a butterfly bush in everybody's garden. And any of the nectar plants that grow easily here, the zinnias, daisies, any of the daisy-like flowers are good butterfly plants.
Okay, I think we have a call on line 3 we'd like to go to now. I think we've lost that call. Let's continue to talk a little bit about butterfly gardening. I know one of the things we've established at the R. Nelson Horticulture Center in our demonstration bed area is a butterfly garden. And Becky and I were talking earlier, I've started noticing a few little butterflies flying around this past week as the temperatures kind of have started heating up. If you're interested in butterfly gardening, you might want to come by the R. Nelson Horticulture Center. Take a look at our butterfly garden. We have a lot of the plants there identified and labeled, and that might give you some ideas of how those plants are going to look like and how they're going to perform in the landscape. We also sell a lot of those plants at some of the plant sales that we participate in, and we try to really promote butterfly gardening in the Acadiana area. We'd like to go on now and talk a little bit about the monarch butterfly and the fritillary. And why don't we take that, and I think we may have a couple calls coming in as well. Let's take that call before we go on to the monarchs. Welcome to Get It Growing.
Yes, I don't have a question about butterflies, but I am having some problems with my peppers in my garden.
Okay.
The leaves are turning upside down and turning black, and then the plant just sits there.
Okay, we are seeing a lot of spotted wilt virus this year in both peppers and tomatoes. And that virus will often, once a plant gets infected with it, the plant will stay stunted. It'll do some strange things, like the leaves might curl, you might get some spotting in the new growth. And the plant right on the side of it will oftentimes, and usually what's the case is the plants all around it are going to be doing great, and you'll have these 1 or 2 plants in the garden that just stay stunted and don't make any peppers, and the plant never really dies, but it just stays real stunted.
Is there anything you can do about it?
No, there are some resistant varieties of peppers that you could try growing. There is one in bell peppers, there's one called Heritage and Stiletto. You can use silver plastic mulches to reflect light that keep the thrips off of the plants that spread the virus from winter weeds. So that's another approach you can take. But in certain years, like this year, it seems like we're going to have a real bad year for virus because we're getting a lot of calls on both tomatoes and peppers being stunted and having problems.
Should I pull those plants out?
Probably the best thing is to pull the plants up, and then to get on the spray schedule, you could spray with an insecticide like spinosad to try to control thrips.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have another call now.
Sorry, that line is busy.
Welcome to Get It Growing.
Yes, I have a question about loquat trees.
Okay.
My neighbor has 3 loquats, and 2 of them are, the individual branches are dying back branch at a time. He cuts the diseased branch out, and the tree appears to be okay for a while, and then another branch dies back.
Okay. What you're describing is a bacterial disease called fire blight, and it's a very common disease that we get, especially on a wet year. And now that our bee population has really started to rebound, we're seeing more bees than we have in past years, because some of the problems that we had in nature, there were some mite problems that had come into the country that had killed off a lot of our native honeybee population. Our bees are making a comeback now, and bees actually spread that bacteria when those loquats are blooming during the winter months. The bees will take that bacteria and spread it in the blooms of the plant. And in the spring, a lot of times you'll start noticing these branches die back. What you're supposed to do is prune back about 8-10 inches below where that diseased branch, where you can see dead tissue there. Prune it out into the healthy tissue, about 6-8 inches into the healthy tissue. Clean your clippers in between each cut with a 10% Clorox solution. And then next year, when the trees were blooming, are going to be blooming, you could spray with a copper fungicide or with an antibiotic like streptomycin to try to control it. But we're seeing a lot of it also in Bradford pears and eating pears as well. It's been a very bad year for fire blight this year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, why don't we go on now to the monarchs and the fritillaries?
Well, monarchs are coming through now from Mexico, so I'm getting a lot of calls and questions about them. The monarch butterfly is probably one of the best recognized of our butterflies and the most famous because it does migrate south every winter. The butterflies that you're seeing now are probably all females because monarchs mate before they ever leave their southern migration site. So these fertilized females are going to be stopping in your garden right now to lay their eggs. And unfortunately, they're not very beautiful. They're a little shabby from their trip north. But they will lay, and then they will pass away, they will die, and their progeny will hatch out in a few weeks and continue the migration up north. The monarchs are a very, very distinctive butterfly, and their larva is very easy to spot on their host plant. It's a green and white and black striped caterpillar with what appears to be antennae at either end. The antennae are at the head, and the antennae at the tail are actually a false head appearance to ward off any predators. The monarch lays her eggs on milkweed, either the native milkweed that grows in the fields or the Asclepias family butterfly weed. You wouldn't want to put the native milkweed in your garden because it is very, very invasive and can really run rampant through a garden. But the butterfly weed is a very good nectar plant as well as being a host for your monarch butterflies. Now, the caterpillars that will be hatching out within the next few weeks will pretty much decimate your butterfly weed, eating all of the leaves. But take heart, because there's going to be a break between migratory cycles, and by the time the next phase of butterflies come through, your butterfly weed will be leafing out again. So keep an eye out on your butterfly weed for your monarchs. And another butterfly that we're seeing a lot right now is the Gulf fritillary. This is a very, very common butterfly here in Lafayette, having up to 5 broods a year. So we will see it from now until the deepest of winter. The Gulf fritillary is a beautiful orange butterfly with silvery spots on its underwing. Very, very beautiful as it's flying. And if you have passion vine in your garden or in the understory or the woods around you, then you will be seeing a lot of Gulf fritillary, because the passion vine is the plant of choice for the fritillary to lay her eggs on. And the fritillary are voracious eaters. They will eat all of the passion vine, and once they have finished the vine and finished the leaves, they will go on to the passion vine fruit, the maypops that we know from childhood. Here we see 2 larvae of the Gulf fritillary finishing off their breakfast of the passion vine fruit. Once they eat all of the leaves, all of the fruit, they will go on into chrysalis. And take heart, because your passion vine will leaf out again and be ready for the next brood of Gulf fritillary to come through. Now, one of the problems with the passion vine is that people sometimes forget that it's going to be eaten up, and they put it in the middle of their garden, a focal point in their over an arbor, and that's not something I would recommend if you're trying to encourage fritillaries to come into your garden.
I know that's one of the things that people will call us about. You know, they want to attract butterflies, but they don't realize that by attracting butterflies, you're also going to have to put up with the good with the bad. You're going to have caterpillars feeding on your plants, and we do get a lot of calls on pest management of caterpillars, and very often some of the butterflies that might be flying through may not be damaging your plants because those might not be host plants. But in other cases, if you see some caterpillars feeding on your plants and you see some butterflies, there may be a cause-effect relationship. But if you ever find some caterpillars and you want to have them identified, we do have a free service at the county agent's office. Probably the best thing is to drop them in a little vial of rubbing alcohol, bring them by the office, and we'll get them identified. And then you'll know whether it's something that you that will turn into a nice, beautiful butterfly, or if it's more of a species that you'd want to try to eradicate. There are a lot of real good insecticides that are fairly safe that you can use to kill insects in your home garden. One of the newer products, there's a product called Spinosad that works really well, and it's a real safe product, but it does a good job on caterpillars. One of the products we also have pushed for years that is very safe is called Dipel, which is actually a bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis, that you can spray in your gardens, and it does an excellent job of controlling caterpillars as well, with very little toxicity to humans or animals. So those are two of the products that we really push that work well on caterpillars. I'd like to mention that we do have a free publication on butterfly gardening, and if you're ever interested in butterfly gardening, just call our office at 291-7090, and we'll be happy to send you that publication. Okay, I think we'd like to move on now and talk a little bit about the Eastern Black Swallowtail and also the Painted Lady.
Sure. The Eastern Black Swallowtail is a beautiful bluish-black butterfly that is a very frequent visitor to the garden, has a very graceful, lazy flight, and just seems to just float through your garden. Some of you may have made calls to Stuart about the Eastern Black Swallowtail, concerned about those worms on your parsley or your fennel, because this is the plant that the Eastern Black would lay her eggs on. The Eastern Black larvae will take down a bunch of parsley in a matter of a day. The larvae is very, very distinctive, very similar to the monarch in that it's a yellowish green and black and yellow stripe. Doesn't have the antenna that the monarch would have. But there's no chance of confusing the two, because if there is a striped caterpillar on parsley, it is an Eastern Black Swallowtail. And the Eastern Blacks are very easy to capture and put into a bug box and to grow on up to full maturity. The other plants that will lay on, as I mentioned, is fennel or dill, are members of the parsnip family. And so a lot of the butterflies that we've talked about lay their eggs on plants that you have purposely put into the garden. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the weeds in your garden that you might want to leave alone and encourage other butterflies to come in. There is a particular butterfly called the Painted Lady that many, many students are familiar with, because this is the butterflies that the teachers will often mail order for butterfly releases. Well, the Painted Lady is very familiar to our gardens, and she lays her eggs on a particular weed called cudweed. And many people see cudweed in the early spring and start yanking it out. But if you leave it, then you will have a higher population of painted ladies in your garden. Cudweed is a very low-growing plant. It's really quite attractive. It's a member of the everlasting family, and the butterfly will lay her eggs on that cottony flowering top, and the larvae that come out will spin a little web each night at rest and then continue to eat the next day. The Painted Lady is a beautiful tawny gold and black striped butterfly, sometimes with a little fuchsia splash of color on its underwing. So look at give your weeds a little more respect, because there are a number of weeds that will be host plants for the Painted Lady. Stuart, some of the other weeds that you might not want to destroy would be the stinging nettle, for instance. If you have a spot where you don't have to worry about pets or children getting into, because that will host the red admiral. And the red admiral is a very, very distinctive butterfly, very beautiful, with red slashes of color on it. Also, wild violets will get the variegated fritillary into your garden, as well as plantains, vetches, and a number of other weeds that will encourage butterflies to propagate in your garden.
Hey, we have a little bit of time left, and we just want to remind you that this is a live call-in show. If you'd like to call in at 232-4434, extension 207, we'll be happy to answer any of your gardening calls. You brought with you a beautiful display today, Becky.
Mm-hmm.
You were mentioning, we were talking a little bit earlier about these were some things that you had picked up at Rain Tree Nursery, and they were gracious enough to donate some of these plants here today for our set. Would you like to maybe mention something about some of these that you have in the display?
Certainly. In the display, of course, we have the buddleia up the top, which is a very, very tall shrub with large, graceful blooms. Here are your composite flowers, daisies, cone flowers, rudbeckia, and sunflower, which are the plants that butterflies like most to feed on because they can perch on the top of them. And then you have your favorites of the garden, the verbenas and lantanas, the clustered flowers and the pentas that butterflies like to feed on because they can stay on one flower head for a long time and feed at each of those little clusters. And the butterfly weed that is a host for the monarch butterfly is also a wonderful source of nectar. Not many of the host plants are also nectar plants, but you can have all types of butterflies feeding on the butterfly weed while at the same time you're hosting the monarch butterfly. Now, one of the problems with the butterfly weed, even though it is a wonderful butterfly plant, a question that I'm asked a lot is about the aphids on the butterfly weed. And unfortunately, even though I'm sure Stuart has an array of poisons that would kill these aphids, since the butterfly weed is a host plant, you cannot use poisons on it. So I suggest you take a bucket of soapy water and dip your hand in it and drench the aphids off, and then give it a strong spray of water, and that'll take care of, it's a good non-chemical way of taking care of your pests.
One thing I think that's always interesting, we talk a little bit about the caterpillars eating the plants, but the butterflies themselves, maybe just talk about, can the butterflies do any damage to your garden?
No, butterflies, if you think about it, are the most benign creature in the insect or animal population. They don't sting, they don't bite, they don't destroy your crops, they don't destroy your lawn. They seem to simply exist for our pleasure. So butterflies in their adult form, the flying insect, is really one of our most vulnerable insects. And unfortunately, they're prey. They're a prey for a number of predators. So we do a great service to the insect community when we encourage butterflies to host in our garden.
And that's one of, I guess, the misnomers a lot of people have. They do have a siphoning mouth part, so, I mean, it's physically impossible for them to be chewing holes in your leaves or doing other things. Another thing we get a lot of calls on is, do butterflies grow once they emerge from a cocoon? My understanding is, a lot of people think that they start out as a little tiny butterfly and they get bigger, but maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Why is there some variation in the size of butterflies?
There's variation in the size because if a butterfly runs out of its host plant, it will pupate and go into chrysalis. And when it comes out, it will be a smaller butterfly. Probably one that won't attract a mate because that is how nature preserves its strengths in its species. So the larger butterflies were the ones that had a long enough time to feed through all of its stages of caterpillar life and then come out as a larger, more beautiful adult.
And I've found that, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, I guess on my desk in my office, we'll get people bring in caterpillars and I'll put them in my desk, and next thing I know the caterpillar has pupated, but as Becky said, often that produces a very small butterfly because that caterpillar went into the chrysalis stage kind of prematurely because it was put under stress. And then once it became an adult, that's it. It doesn't mature anymore, and it doesn't grow in size. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that we answered some of you.
The views expressed in the previous program are solely those of the program participants and its producer.